know that any set of names that we looked at was perfect. There was always something that felt kind of left out. Initially, the traditional neighborhood came from the traditional neighborhood development, which is kind of a planning term that's been incorporated into the state code to some extent, with requirements to designate urban development areas. And then planning literature, the counterpart is conventional suburban development. So that was kind of part of where we came to suburban, because it stands on kind of the opposite end of that axis. With both traditional and conventional, though, I think there's some concern that both are kind of fixed to a place in time, and what people think that place in time is different. And so, I know when I first started, when we were working on a comprehensive plan, I was very confused by the traditional neighborhood concept because it did not match what I thought that term meant. I don't know how much better, if at all, urban is over traditional. But the goal is just to get three terms that kind of sit on an axis and describe neighborhoods in general. But of course, we're open to whatever alternatives the Planning Commission might think worthwhile.
I'm not in love with suburban. Because that to me sounds like suburban sprawl, which I'm hoping we can minimize in all areas.
Question. What, did you have more to add, or?
No, I'm just musing on that. Not quite sure what else to do with it.
So you mentioned that the goal is to have three terms to sit on an axis and to describe those neighborhoods. What other sub-goals as you see it, and how to lay that out?
And as we were working on names, I think a few other things came up. Like the current numbering pattern, I think, confuses people. There's a presumption that as you go up in number, there's some sort of change that's occurring, and sometimes it goes back and forth between the different numbers. And it doesn't quite work well when you get to something like the existing R8, where at least the by right uses are fairly similar to the existing R1 and R2 by right uses. It's just that the lot sizes are significantly smaller, and so that kind of leaves everything in between in a weird spot.
I guess what I'm thinking is, it seems like there's kind of two goals. One, make it readily able to understand the person who doesn't know anything about zoning at a glance, and that it actually reflects what that district is. Would you say that's a...
Yeah.
I preferred an earlier iteration, particularly when we were just having small meetings of low, medium, and high density, period. But that doesn't apply to these three particular. That's more like residential townhomes and multifamily is low, medium, and high in my mind. So these are, in that sense, kind of three gradations of low density, more or less, right? As in they're all single-family homes, whether attached or not, maybe including duplexes, smaller, larger lots.
Right.
So these are all low density, more or less. So why do we need this granularity? I guess I'm getting.
So state code is going to require, or I think it already does, requires the city to have a district where a single-family home can be built on a lot that is 30 feet wide and no larger than 3,000 square feet. A 30-foot width lot, in addition to driveways, means something like 70% of the street face is going to be driveways, and so making those work outside of, unless you require very, very narrow driveways.
Or alleys in the back?
Yeah, unless you have alleys in the back. And so at least one of the districts needs to meet the requirements of the state code.
So that would be an extra low density, or whatever, I mean, you know, I don't know, like what the purpose is here, aside from that. Which one of these meets that?
The urban neighborhood for the minimum lot size is smallest.
And it does kind of correlate to low, medium, high. So you could have low, medium, high neighborhood, and then they're attached community and garden community to differentiate.
Yeah, these could be the low, medium, and high
Neighborhood.
neighborhoods,
Yeah.
more or less. But is the density the only, the distinguishing factor here?
It's the housing types within them too. Yeah.
And really it's the streets.
No.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, you think of the way the streets in like Wyndham Woods are laid out compared to the streets in Old Town.
Yeah. Cul-de-sacs versus grid. I don't want any more cul-de-sacs as forward-thinking neighborhood definition. See, I'm really kind of, maybe this is a kind of earlier discussion, wondering what the purpose of all this. So far, we seem to be just mapping to what's already there rather than what we want it to be.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Our focus is to fix the foundation.
Yeah. So just because they're cul-de-sacs now doesn't mean we don't want to do grid-connected streets in the future. So that's why, that was kind of my underlying rejection of suburban. I kind of like that low, medium, and high neighborhood.
I think as far as the understanding to look at a map and see that, it seems like it's the easiest way to.
So low would still be the primarily single-family detached, right? Although they now have accessory dwelling units and so on. Medium would be the flexible thing, and high urban. But again, is high, is the density, the chief distinguishing factor, you said something about streets, really?
Yeah, I'm not loving the low, medium, high, because I spent a lot of time in this thinking about my own neighborhood, Sunset Heights, where we have grid connected streets. We have sidewalks, some of them, not others. But I think that the main reason why I guess that got included in the neighborhood residential or suburban neighborhood was because of lot size and kind of singularity of housing type. So, you know, for existing neighborhoods, I guess. So, I mean, I like these recommended names better than the other ones. I don't like the high, medium, low because I think, to me, they conjure aspirational and property value distinctions that don't exist, but nonetheless, I think they do conjure them. So.
They're different.
Yeah, and because it is the density of, it is a mixture of street configurations, building types, housing types, and lot sizes. It's not an easy task to find a designation for it. So.
I think part of the problem is, housing types and densities is a significant part of it, probably most readily easily understood by folks looking at it for the first time. But it's also so incremental from one to the next that even if you were going to do it like low, medium, high, it's different. But this is kind of what I was thinking about the suburban and urban. It's really flexible. It doesn't really mean a whole lot on its own. It makes sense within the context of it being in the middle, but it doesn't really. So if presented in that context, it's useful. But suburban and urban are kind of the wings of it. I think suburban is relatively well understood. People have a picture in their minds of what suburban means. But urban, I don't know. To me, the only place that's urban in Harrisonburg is downtown Harrisonburg. I wouldn't really describe other parts of Harrisonburg that way.
Well, I think there are other neighborhoods that are urban. I mean, maybe not in the high-rise apartment building sense, but in neighborhood textures that you would find in working-class parts of other cities. You know, for instance, the Bruce Street, the Wolf Street area west of High Street is one of them. I would argue the Gay Street, Rock Street, Wolf Street, north of West Market Street and west of High Street, you know, parts of that as well too. Even more so when they had corner stores and other things tucked into them. So I think I think some of this is that when we get through the comp, because we as the planning commission can't say what we want it to be when we're done. That's the role of the comp plan, and then we come back and map that onto this ordinance. I don't want to lose sight of that. So, you know, maybe one question I would ask is there anything in the way we think about these three different types of neighborhoods that speak to which ones are we going to make more adaptable to housing innovations going forward? Because by the definitions in the intents you wrote, the neighborhood residential or suburban neighborhood, whatever you find, that's going to be the classic one house on a lot, bigger lots, you know, perhaps neighborhoods that are less likely, you know, that may have wider streets that are more comfortable for people to walk in, as opposed to the urban neighborhood, which with the smaller lots and more historically sized streets really have to have sidewalks to be walkable in any kind of safe way. So which of these areas are the ones where we're more likely to create flexibility and opportunity for innovation in how we live? And is there any merit to reflecting that, signaling that in the names that we give to them?
Well, that would sound like flexible.
Well,
Flexibility.
sure. I mean, suburban is literally less than urban, which the neighborhoods that are marked that way are less urban.
And I do want to go back a little bit here. I mean, what I was saying about urban, and I don't think we actually disagree on this either, is just that when we talk about suburban, we're probably having a similar picture in our minds. When we talk about urban, I think our conversation here has already illustrated that we have two very different pictures of what that means. And so if someone is seeing it for the first time and hearing it for the first time, they have different ideas.
I'd say there's also preconceived notions about these names too. So if we say low, medium, and high density, and then there's going to be aspirational.
Yeah.
Same thing about these.
Yeah.
I actually don't mind traditional neighborhood in place of urban, and that has a lot of other issues. I think Cherwell might have said at some point, but stuck in my head, rather there's no solutions, there's only trade-offs. But
conceptually, that sounds like me. Really doesn't, but
I mean, I think one advantage of saying traditional neighborhood is that in some of the older neighborhoods, it does actually reflect what a lot of them live like. And it does accurately describe what a lot of those became. I beg your pardon, I'm going to need some coffee before I'm done. So, in terms of which ones are actually would be slated to be turned into traditional neighborhoods, tend to be older neighborhoods, or at least some older neighborhoods close to downtown.
Yeah, so, it's the areas, so right now, the urban residential are the areas where, just write it down, the Chicago Avenue is here, and, like Costello Street area, Shenandoah Avenue area, also West Wolf Street up until Willow Street.
Could we simply call them
In Old Town.
pre-modern, modern, and flexible.
Well,
Because that's literally what they are in time.
the word that keeps coming to my mind, we don't want to add, we don't want to get crazy adding words, script and making them all 8 words long, but if in fact it's true, would something like core urban neighborhood make sense?
Inner, perhaps.
Yeah, I could live with that too, because I think that's what we're talking about. We're talking about not just older neighborhoods, but these ones that are close. It seems like, and I'm open to have exceptions pointed out to me, but we are talking about the ones that are sort of closest to the core center of the city. And it's interesting to me that just knowing, because of the history, that it looks like, for example, that it does bring in sort of Weaver and those stretches on the other side of Reservoir. Am I reading it right?
I'm sorry.
Sort of the Purcell Park neighborhood, which is historically accurate. That's an old residential neighborhood that was sort of pulled into the city way back when.
Well, and then, yeah, what is Northeast neighborhood?
So northeast neighborhood would be designated, how to call it, the flexible.
The flexible. Okay. Which at least in some respects does reflect what's on the ground, because while that's a neighborhood that's dominated by kind of single family detached homes, it's not exclusively that.
Part of why I'm drawn to traditional is, well, in a literal sense, these tend to be older neighborhoods named 11. It's almost like create the first setting ordinance on nation. In Harrisonburg, it does actually reflect a traditional neighborhood, and not necessarily limited to geographic area, but also it is kind of the neighborhood that I would like to encourage more of in terms of its development style. And the fact that traditional sounds more appealing is part of it too. But it's also a reality of what's described.
I guess I'm also realizing now I'm balking a little bit of traditional in the sense that I think, so in traditional neighborhood planning, which is a literal specific zoning
Which
thing.
I don't know much about, so.
Yeah, but also part of the criticism of it is that it is elitist and privileged. And when, I think, in a lot of contexts, when you talk about tradition, you talk about whose traditions. And what value systems are you trying to enforce through those traditions? So again, I would lean towards more technical names than names that signal aspirations. I mean, even though I said, again, until we do the aspirational work, which is the comp planning.
So what is traditional, you touched on this a little bit, but what does traditional generally mean to you in this context? It sounds like elitist, or is there a particular?
Well, I think it. Yeah, I'm not sure I'm prepared to answer that, and I'm not sure I want to do that in this context.
Well, let me throw in another thought that in addition to that, to stick with a name like traditional about this would at least have a sense of irony to it, because as staff is pointing out, the reason we got this district is, and again, you could argue that it really was traditional if you go back far enough, but the point being that the driver is the relatively new state law requiring us to have a small lot size district. So in that sense, under the traditional, I think that's another angle for saying that the word, which I think is really why that was probably the biggest driver for staff anyway, but that whether it's just changing that name, if I understood them correctly, but the traditional also doesn't capture that aspect of.
Yeah, because the driver for smaller lot sizes is more about affordability and the ease of building smaller homes, which, I don't know what I don't know what value system or culture you map that to, but that's just economic reality, is the need for it, so.
Also traditional, I would think in some minds at least, would evoke the suburban cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I was saying, on top of everything else, when you do traditional, it's like which tradition, I mean, it's like, it's not entirely different from this thing you do in historic, renovations where you realize that the building looked one way in 1820 and another way in 1860 and another one in 1890 and another one in 1930. And I'm sorry, which one is the traditional one to restore it to?
What would be helpful to a realtor trying to market a home in each of these areas? Because at the end of the day, I think if I'm a property owner and I'm thinking about selling my house, I'm not sure flexible neighborhood means anything to, somebody coming in from a town that maybe doesn't have that designation or anything, or rated. So it might be just for the sake of economy, what are terms that are useful to a realtor in describing the density, the streetscape, the building types and stuff that are present in it.
I think you were getting somewhere with core. For the urban neighborhood, traditional, whatever you call it, that is adjacent to the central downtown. But then transitional, flexible,
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking something along inner, transitional, and I don't know, the opposite of inner is outer, but.
Transitional, that's another baggage.
Hmm? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Regentrification. Gentrification coming soon. Yeah, no, don't want that.
Would you all like time, I'm kind of interested in, to hear your thoughts while also knowing that we have a lot of other things to discuss.
Yeah.
I don't know if we want to set in the next 2 weeks, send us ideas for names, and we can revisit it at our next meeting.
I'm going to do a thesaurus.
If I could just offer some food for thought, well, from the staff perspective, when we were sitting, we sat in the room for, I don't know, like a good little bit, just going through different types of, cycling through names and changing out things. And I feel like you kind of hit this point where inevitably you pick something that you think would work and then you talk yourself out of it, 20 seconds later. Right, and I think you guys are starting to, sort of see that, where you try to avoid something that has a preconceived notion, and then you pick something else, and you come up with, everybody's going to have a different opinion about what they think that means. And, at some point, it is a word, most words will have some sort of connection or baggage that a different person will have, different people will have, and that the district intent is contextualizing that word, right? For our zoning ordinance, urban means this. Everybody's going to have a different opinion about urban, and doesn't have a different opinion about traditional, but the intent statement for the district will help to give context that, well, we mean this. Urban in this context for our ordinance means this, or traditional means this, or urban means this. So earlier today, I was even thinking of this, maybe less of trying to pick different names, and it's just make sure the intent statement for the district matches what we would hope to achieve with that word, rather than changing the word from suburban to traditional to back to neighborhood residential or something like that. Just some food for thought.
No, I agree. I'm sure we're going down paths you all have been through before, and I'm sure it's frustrating when there's so much to do, so I recognize that. But now that I think about it, there's two things, and I saw them as improvements of what they had before, and I stopped there. I didn't push it further, but now that the discussion's out there, I think there's two things. I think that if we don't get this right, people are going to look on the new zoning map and go, they're either going to immediately go, oh yeah, that makes sense, that's clearer, that's simpler, or they're going to go, I don't understand it, and now you're starting from a defensive posture in engaging them before you ever get to the narrative of what the neighborhood is. I do think the names matter as this thing gets to a wider public circle. And I would like to, and I would like to just do this as an individual, so that I don't know if procedurally I'm going to trip over anything. But candidly, I would like to go talk to a couple realtor friends of mine and pick their brains on behalf of the planning commission. I think that, and I actually had this thought between meetings that, you know, it's part of a broader sense. Are there things that we, as I was going back through everything that we've done, I was asking myself, are there things, to the extent that we've taken on, that there's going to be a phase of community engagement, about that I understand. But can we aid that process by each of us as individual planning commissioners, maybe having strategic conversations with people and just simply take a posture of what do you think about this or what do you think about that, and bring it back to this meeting. And I think this is probably, I just, you know, I just would like, there's a couple of realtors I know and value, and I'd like their opinion.
I think that's a great idea.
What I'm noticing, and since you mentioned the intent statements, suburban neighborhood, or whatever you call it, says explicitly low-density residential. Urban neighborhood accommodate medium density, so maybe even simplify to that. Low density, medium density, and what's the one in between? Low, medium density? Anyway, just another thought. Yes, because I agree that that intention is clearer than the name we've got so far.
I'm just looking back to the existing, the current breakdown of zoning designations. I mean, all we say R1, we don't need to say what it actually is. So there might be a degree to which this is almost a moot point. Like a single family residential district is R1, and an R2 is residential district, which doesn't really tell you a whole lot about what that district is. And R3 is multiple dwelling district, which again doesn't really tell you a whole lot about what exactly that is. Maybe two takeaways I have from that. One, you can possibly use more than one word to describe it. And two, know that this matters as much as we think it does.
Why don't I'm going to suggest September 7th, it's a Monday, so a couple of weekends, it's almost 3 weeks, not quite, but you all talk to people, you know, if you have anybody. Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, I just figured
So
give you all the
great.
weekends, and then you can be the 8th. It's just, Leslie and I will need to, you know, prepare, collect whatever you all send to us and put it in a memo to then share back with the agenda by that Friday.
September 9th, regular planning commission meeting.
I think it's fair for you to say to those of us that want more time, take more time, but be quick about it. I think that's a legitimate request.
Yeah, because whatever date we get in there, we're gonna be on September 9th.
Right.
So.
And then the next work session will be the 15th.
Following week, right.
So you want it before that next work session?
Correct, yeah, so that we can compile
And maybe
it.
ideally even before the next planning commission meeting, although I think.
Yeah, just so
I think
that-
we're not gonna be, yeah, I mean, what are we gonna do, kick somebody off if they try to give you something later? I mean, that's not what we do.
Okay.
Yeah, let's
That's
try to
the
make a
goal.
good
We'll
effort
try-
to
yeah,
get it
do our
in
best.
before Labor Day if you can.
Okay.
But thank you for your flexibility, and I do want to emphasize that I think the descriptions and what you've done has moved it in a really important direction, and I like the three distinctions. So, thanks for giving us more time with the names.
I agree. Before, I had no idea what the difference was.
Right.
I mean, I looked at them and I instantly had no idea. And it's definitely going in the right direction.
And if you work with them, you develop a sense kind of on the ground of what they were, but they had their own little exceptions and historical things, and these are, if you look, I mean, I think the descriptions of what's intended in these three, while they track a little bit R1, R2, and R3, this is better. So, I mean, I do think we're going in the right direction with trying to do that. And in fact, part of the reason we're doing this is that those old definitions just don't quite seem to capture everywhere, even if you are gonna take the time to study up on them, like you said, R1, R2, R3, V1, V2, M1, not the most inviting terms to the general public.
Also, the currently called urban neighborhood also kind of incorporates R8, right? Smaller lots, more density. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not exactly mapping to R3. It's
No,
more
no.
a combination of R3 and R8 or something.
No, it definitely doesn't.
Right.
And like I said, I think these are I do think that the definitions are better descriptors of ways to divide these categories than what we have right now. But they do track the history a little bit.
Yep. Okay.
I think what Randy said, though, is the name is important because we're taking away those R1, R2, R3s that people put to. So if we're gonna change it, it needs to be changed with purpose. Because even though it doesn't correlate exactly right now, when you tell people you're taking something away, I don't know if that's a posture.
All right, well, are we done at this point with item 3B for now? All right, well, thank you for that lively and hopefully helpful discussion.
Yep.
And more to come, which gets us to item 3C, review portions of draft zoning ordinance text as we move into proposed Article E.
All right. So with the parking and landscaping, in general, the goal was to make some modest adjustments, but leave large-scale changes for a future phase of updating the zoning ordinance. But I'll try to go over some of the highlights of what are changing, or what is changing, and some of the more philosophical questions that kind of go with all this. I'm guessing the thing that will get the most attention is the parking minimums, so I'll start there, and that's also where the biggest changes are. So the current parking regulations, there are a few issues. One, the terminology doesn't align almost at all with the rest of the zoning ordinance. So, well, uses from one zoning district to the next are slightly different, but then it's quite noticeably different with the parking regulations. So there's a lot of, you just have to kind of figure it out and interpret it. For the new zoning ordinance, the uses in the use tables will all just be accounted for in the parking table. So no more kind of deciphering the different descriptions between the districts and the parking regulations. And then the other difficulty is that parking minimums right now, a number of them are just based on things that are difficult to verify. So manufacturing requires parking based on the maximum number of people working at the site at a given time, plus space for commercial vehicles associated with the use. That will change over time depending on if the tenant changes or if the market changes, or you can't get people to work night shift and you're real crowded during the day all of a sudden. In hospitals, their parking is based on a formula that involves bed count, the number of attending physicians on staff, and weirdly all employees. I assume the intent is just the number of employees actually working at a given time, but it's written in a way that's different than all the others that track employee count. Gives me pause. And you have things like retail stores vary by floor area. So the draft tries to move everything into measurable quantities that can be indicated on a plan prior to construction, and that wouldn't change unless you were doing something that either a change of use that would require you to come in and go through the change of use process for the building, or it's some sort of addition to the building that where you're coming in and bringing in plans. And then trying to take similar uses and get them all just into a similar ratio. The most significant change is for restaurants. Right now, those are one parking spot per 100 square feet. They'll move to one per 250 square feet. And most, or really all, probably all customer-oriented commercial uses in the draft are at one per 250 square feet. Oftentimes this doesn't really make a difference. many of our restaurants and other commercial uses are part of larger shopping centers where they currently follow that rule anyway. There are cases though where maybe an older commercial building, tenant's gone, it's sat vacant, and the parking is what's making it difficult to find a new tenant. Maybe a restaurant wants to move in, but a restaurant can't. Because the parking ratios are different for so many different commercial uses, the adaptability on a small site of an existing commercial building can be a challenge. So there's one upside of merging these is that that will provide some improved flexibility. But it is a fairly substantial change. At least for one-off restaurants that aren't part of a shopping center, that is a pretty big difference in the number of parking spots they'll need. Then it's divided up into other categories, so like office-oriented uses, medical offices, personal services, professional offices. They're all 1 per 300. It's mostly where they are today, just with things stripped out. Lower intensity commercial uses like vehicle sales, catering, animal services are 1 per 500 square feet. And most industrial uses are 1 per 1,000. Storage related are 1 per 2,000. Institutional care is 1 per 3 beds, except for nursing homes, 4. And the other big one is residential. So it's 1 per dwelling unit, except in the R, AC, and GC districts. Those are the districts that cover most of our student housing. There are a lot of 4-bedroom units there. That we are proposing a 0.85 parking spaces per bedroom. Right now, there's a different number of parking spots that you need depending on the number of bedrooms per unit. I've had more than one developer mention to me that they felt like they were being penalized for trying to include 1 and 2 bedrooms. The current ratios right now, a 1 or a 2 bedroom unit needs more than 1 parking space per bedroom. A 3 or a 4 bedroom unit needs less than 1 parking space per bedroom. So if your goal is to rent to students and you want to be able to rent by the bedroom, and you say, fine, I'll hold my number of bedrooms steady, I'll just add more units and make some of them 2 or 1 bedroom, you have to find somewhere for those new parking spaces under the current zoning ordinance. So the ratio is a very tiny reduction in the required parking if it were all 4 bedrooms. So a 4-bedroom unit will be almost identical. Everything else will just have the same ratio. So those are most of the highlights of the minimum parking. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts at this stage, or if any of these are crazy, they are totally fine. I anticipate whatever we adopt will change sometime soon. And this section has been amended 18 times in the last 30 years. One of our most amended sections, I'm sure.
Well, I applaud
the
the simplification. I mean, that was my impression going through it and comparing it to the other ones before. The restaurant one was the one that jumped out to me the most, the biggest change. The other one that I kind of have some professional involvement with is churches. And that was significantly simplified because there used to be provisions in there for simultaneous use of the rest of the building. Now, 2 things tell me that I'm not going to get too uptight about this. One is that, overall church attendance is going down, so people aren't filling up the seating they have in the auditorium. But, however, healthy churches are using their buildings in more as community centers, and also typically having higher use of the whole entire building. But the regulator there is that most growing churches pay careful attention to how much parking they have and how easy the parking is, so they're going to address it. They're always going to be looking to provide more than a minimum. I mean, most churches aren't going to be unlevel about providing a minimum amount of parking. So I'm fine. That was a lot of wasting people's time to say I'm fine with the simplification of that.
I have a question about that. For the single family detached and attached the one per dwelling, is that counting street parking? How is that
No,
gonna
it
be
doesn't
incorporated?
count, on street parking.
So if we wanna build a new duplex or in any of those, you have to have a driveway going into the front of it?
Either a driveway or if there happens to be an alley, you can use an alley.
Okay.
Or accessory dwelling unit.
And then similar question but on the bike parking side for the townhouse. What's the thought process in bike parking being incorporated into a townhouse complex? Just like a little concrete pad somewhere in the facility that would have bike parking? Or is that
That's how
like?
it typically happens today, yeah. It's on a common property usually that someone can
Either a single collection point of all the bike racks or they're dispersed throughout pads throughout the community.
Okay.
Because otherwise people would just keep their own bike in the garage, but it's maybe that's their business.
Councilmember Dent, you mentioned accessory dwelling units. We'll address that in the future.
Sure.
Yeah.
In general, I like these changes as well. I don't really have any issues. I mean, I asked several questions, but they were really all aimed at why we have arguments in the first place. So, I don't have anything to add on this section.
I was wondering for like the institutional care section where it's all based on the number of beds, is there any concern that the facility might not be bed driven, like you might only have 2 beds in there and the facility's being used more, like for a hospital? Maybe it's not gonna have a lot of beds in it, it's gonna be used for a different reason. So you'd only need 2 parking spaces for the facility per code. Is there any concern with that?
Yeah, if it's more like a hospital, it's laid out more like individual doctor's office.
Just be,
Yeah, that's a good question.
didn't know if there'd be other uses that could fall in there somehow that
Mhm.
could potentially cause problems.
Okay. This is really, sorry,
You go.
this is really minor, but I'm just curious.
Mhm.
The golf course, the 4 parking spots per hole. What's going on?
I can't
there?
remember if that was from our ordinance or if I copied it from one of the Northern Virginia localities that had a lot of golf courses. I don't know.
People play in foursomes. You
Um.
individually a foursome for every hole, and they all come separately. I mean, I don't know if that's the logic, but
I have no idea.
when I read that, I was like, oh, that makes sense.
I don't play a lot of golf, I don't know if that comes across.
Is there any option to put some sort of an exemption in for other commercial space for minimum parking? Like if you're in a neighborhood commercial development, the thought process behind neighborhood commercial is you're close to a neighborhood, would be therefore able to walk to it, or bike to it.
Mhm.
Is there any way to put in an exemption for minimum parking requirements for certain zones?
Yeah, you could do that.
Do you have a particular idea? Because like in downtown, the exemption is there's no parking at all. Let's say extreme example, right?
Yeah. I don't know those from my down on my head. I can think about it a little more and put it in. But just having some sort of, like almost like a special use permit where if I want to put in just like a really small building on a corner lot next to an neighborhood, is there a way to put an exemption to be applied for to have no parking minimums? I'll think.
That is a tool that is available.
So I guess somewhat related to that, my question is, what happens to current 10-3-26?
Is that the, shared parking?
Yeah, that's the calculations about shared parking lots.
Yeah.
And I can see how what's in the current one
Mhm.
falls into that category of things of how in the world are we going to enforce,
Mhm.
we're doing that. But I thought, and I saw some of it in the existing one, and maybe I saw a little bit of it in the proposed innovation, but I thought there was a goal to kind of acknowledge that when you like in a strip shopping center, that there's probably some uniform reduction that if you just add up all the requirements for the individual uses, that what's really needed is probably some percentage of the sum of that. And I didn't know if, that wasn't exactly what 10.3.26 was doing, but I also didn't see it in the new one.
So 10.3.26 is,
We kept some of it, like,
yeah.
but I think you're
Parts
referring
of
to.
it, yeah.
So, so what we had discussed this morning, Tyler, Leslie, and I took the opportunity to review some of the questions, some of you had sent in advance. Thank you for that. This was one of those questions, and there's only one instance where this has been used in the city.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. And there's been others who have explored it, you know, and actually one that Tyler said is being explored now, but it's only been used once, so we didn't think it was very useful.
An issue that a lot of people have run into is just, and it may just be coincidence, that a lot of the uses that people are looking at wanting to share with require 100% of the parking 100% of the time, according to this table. So they have no shareable parking.
Okay.
And that, like I said, that may just be coincidence that those are the uses that have come up that they have tried to explore shared parking with. But Hannah is correct. There is only one example that we are aware of where they actually played this out and did the agreement properly, and then and constructed it and actually used it. And every other circumstance is either one that hasn't actually come into effect yet, or they weren't able to do it.
So, I mean, there might be two things. I mean, so I understand what you're saying relative to what's in that code. That makes sense. And why are we going to go to all of this trouble for something that's only been used once? But is there validity to the principle that if we do a strip shopping center, and this might speak a little bit to your neighborhood commercial thing. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, even some like gas stations now will have a pizza place and something else in addition to the gas station itself. I guess, is there a mechanism that as commercial facilities grow, we don't just linearly multiply parking?
Yeah, so the current retail store minimum parking tracks what, or as it's currently written in the zoning ordinance, where it's one parking space for every 200 square feet of gross floor area. And then if over 10,000 square feet of gross floor area, it's one parking space for every 250. So the 200 and the 250 numbers are basically identical to what most suburban communities have. 10,000 is bizarrely low. It's usually 100,000, and a Kroger is usually about 50,000 square feet. So at 10,000 square feet, you're usually, that's more, like CVS is often more than 10,000 square feet. You're not talking about a strip center. But I think that's what we're getting at, that we do sort of have that, except it doesn't really wind up being applied because our threshold is so low.
Well,
it is something communities do, having a higher.
Well, and I also wonder if going forward, if there's an opportunity, and again, this would be something to bring up during the comp planning, is that I wonder if big shopping centers, like, I'm thinking of like the one down at, where the Habitat Restore is, the Kroger lot is another one. If there aren't opportunities in conjunction with zoning designations, that if those, because they have obscenely large lots that are never ever full, to give incentives to the owners to say, okay, you can come back and retroactively apply through some process, get a reduction in required parking, provided you use it for developing something else on that property. I guess maybe at the end of the day, is that the fundamental Roses problem we keep bumping up against? That Roses will never, ever, ever need as much parking as what they have.
Well, some shopping centers, and this isn't a universal thing, but some shopping centers, especially stuff in like the 70s and 80s, they're actually providing way more parking than we even require them to provide today. it was
Yeah.
developed with an accessible parking.
Right.
So, I don't have a specific example in mind, but I know I've seen some shopping centers where like, they could cut out portions of their parking lot today with would use our current parking calculations.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I don't know whether that, they did that because it was a market driven or just the time of development, there was more reason to have that amount of parking, but, yeah, that's just something to keep in mind. Not every shopping center right now currently only has.
Yeah, that's a good point. So maybe the incentives to develop the extra parking come from somewhere else, but, and that's a separate issue. The other example that I was thinking of is that it was 2010, 2011, when the community health center built a facility on Ford Road. And I apologize, I don't remember what it was. There was some mechanism that allowed them to shave off some parking spaces.
They got a special use permit, and the special use permit required them to have green space in place of the required parking, and then they realized they actually, I don't think they ever took advantage of it, so they put in the required parking, and then they needed even more.
Yeah, I remember they immediately regretted not having more parking spaces from the day they moved in, so that one backfired,
Yeah, the house is very true for many different uses. It's not just shopping centers. There are uses that, you see the parking lot, you assume that they're just meeting the minimum, but they're not. They're well over.
Yeah.
Didn't that health center also have parking across the street? Didn't it? Yeah.
That was the additional parking they needed.
The only recent example of what Adam described that I could think of that carried through with using the green space with Tractor Supply. They did their green Tractor Supply on Baxter. They did, they showed dedicated green space and for some reduced they'd have to provide the parking if we required them to at some point in the future, so that green space still would remain green space for future parking. But at least today, as the site exists, you will see the amount of parking they have there is less than would otherwise be required if they didn't dedicate that green space.
And with the older large shopping centers, it's not uncommon, like Arlington along Columbia Pike did this. They created essentially a foreign-based overlay district for some of the older industrial areas where they knew the current tenants wanted to stay there. They also knew that when that tenant left, it was going to be redeveloped. So they decided ahead of time, we want blocks to be X distance minimum to this, Y length maximum. Buildings 3 stories to 5 stories, they need to be built here. Whenever you're ready, come in and do it. And once you apply for a building permit under the new zoning district, you basically forfeit your industrial use right.
Yeah.
But it's fairly common for communities to come up with some sort of this is really what we want it to look like when you do redevelop, because we know that the age of that building, the degree of maintenance that's occurred, you're going to be needing to do something eventually.
Yeah, and the incentives and the reasons why you do to get developed are obviously complex, but I guess there are some neat examples of old 70s vintage shopping centers being turned into some pretty amazing mixed use complexes and stuff where so anyway, don't know what we can do to spur that kind of stuff, but
Well, we were approved a new housing development on the mostly unused parking at the cinema.
right.
And seemed to go down.
Right.
Yeah, so one, notice it's blank, educational uses. So today, when a public school brings their parking plans to planning commission, and it's never been entirely clear to me what that is for, because there's not a vote. I guess it's at most an opportunity for an airing of grievances and an attempt to convince the school board to do something different. But I'm not sure what we're trying to accomplish with that. And then how we want to treat private schools as well. And then the same thing with colleges and universities. It always feels a little bit weird to require something of the EMU knowing that JMU could just do it. I wanted to see if anyone had any thoughts on, do we want public schools to continue coming to us to talk about their parking lots? Do we?
Well, does that also entail a public meeting? So is there an opportunity for public comment in the parking plans?
It's not a public hearing.
Yeah, I don't think it's been a public hearing in the past.
No, I don't think so either. It's just states that they have to bring the plan to sort of like sort of like the variation where it's like you hear it, but it's not a public hearing, or it's not required to be a public hearing.
So are they just looking for CYA? If somebody complains later, they get, well, the planning commission said it was okay.
I'm not sure any of us are able to actually answer why it has to come to you guys. That's what it says.
I mean,
it's supposed to do.
Does this happen in other places? Is there somewhere in the code this is?
Some places it does happen. Some places will have their school board hold a 2232 public hearing on a public facility. Some of it seems to be how well did the school board and the governing body get along or not. Do they? I don't know that the schools have ever complained about having to do it. Okay.
I guess I'm confused, what's the purpose of them bringing it to us? We don't have any say here, it doesn't go to council afterwards, we're not recommending anything, it's just more for us to hear the plan. That's it.
I think
So, and yeah,
Well, that's the one where it's, we make a ruling about how well it fits with the comp plan.
for the 2232, but I think when schools come, like if they're doing an addition or something and adjusting a parking lot, I don't know that the planning commission is voting on it at all.
we did, we did it with the we did it with Rocktown.
Yeah.
In the mimic school, Rocktown, I must be getting confused with 2232 hearing then. No, I'm talking about when the schools come to us, yeah, with the parking.
Because that's limited, that's on public property, right? Isn't that?
Correct, yeah, and
that's-
then the last time we had a private school, it never came to fruition, but it was that one off of MLK, Union Way. Where we just sort of heard how many staff they were proposing, how many students they thought they'd have, and
We've got some new commissioners here,
Yeah.
just a real, it is an odd, but there's a statute that says that when you're doing something on public property, that the planning commission needs to hold a public hearing and make a determination of how well it fits into your, whether it is consistent or not, especially since this is your comp plan.
This section?
Probably.
2232.
Probably, yeah. And then it goes to council, but it's, and it has occasionally been interpreted by groups that really didn't like something as a way to kill it. It's never been applied that way, and I can think of one instance in particular where it's not even clear that that's what the statute is. To me, it's never been clear that that statute is there for any reason other than, being Virginia, you just almost imagine that somebody somewhere in some local government just railroaded something through, and they got to the General Assembly and said, well, you at least gotta let the Planning Commission give the elected officials a thumbs up or thumbs down on whether it's consistent with the planning, not that the elected officials are required to follow that.
Well, I think,
And he's reading it, so maybe I'll just shut up and start going off memory.
Well, it's a longer statute than I'm really going to read right now. But I think, I mean, it can be, just based on what I'm seeing right now, it doesn't seem like it would be absurd to look at the statute in that way. I think the other part of this is, in our code, 10-1-6, will determine the location, character, and startups of public facilities and
finished recorded. I guess on that point, the question is parking public facility, which I guess it is, if the building is.
So, at what point in the planning did Rocktown come to you? Did it come to you when the plans were done, or did it come to you when it was conceptual? Or at what point did it come in?
We also rezoned that property before it was developed.
Yeah.
I'd have to go back, I'd have to find it.
They historically, some of them, I do remember seeing it have trickled in when the process was kind of underway already.
Yeah, I mean, the one public school process I remember, for a variety of reasons, was around it was, I'm blanking on the name now, Stone Spring. Well, a little bit of conversations about Harrisonburg High School, and it was placed and built as well too, so. I mean, I guess the question for me, is it brought with the sincerity for input from the Planning Commission and the public? Or is it really there for us to give validation to the inevitable?
And as I said, I've never been able to make it. To me, it's always read like it was just it was something to make sure that the Planning Commission told the elected officials how it fits in with the comp plan, yay or nay, just so somebody can say that somebody looked at that. Because it's not a statute that has a bunch of teeth in it that says that, oh no, and if you don't approve, you got to get this approval, so on and so forth. I mean, it just seemed like, I mean, in a way, I'll analogize, because there's another one people get tripped up on if they're hot and bothered about something, is the CIP. That the CIP has a kind of baseline that's really fairly basic. It's really something they came up with, mostly for smaller jurisdictions, just to make sure that there's something in place so that major capital projects don't just sort of we'll get to it whenever we need it, and otherwise we'll never think about it. No, we'll have a formal process that makes you do it. And then you say, well, what's the penalty for violating the CIP? There's no penalty for violating the CIP. It's a planning structure that sort of is kind of making the elected officials at least take that look at it.
Yeah.
And I've always felt like the 2232 is like that.
Is this just like, you were talking about it's 15.2-2232?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll make sure that it's okay.
So what would be helpful to you all for completing this, or does that need to be completed? Because I wonder for private school, is there any place where you can build a private school by right in the city?
That is, I appreciate you bringing that up. That was where we ended up with, we were wondering what your thoughts would be if we proposed this private school. It would be something that would be reviewed at the time the special use permit would be reviewed, because that's what we proposed for private schools, or by special exception is the new term. And then public school, college, or university, while I feel like I want to put something in there, would we be comfortable with the other extreme, with an extreme of just putting NA and trusting the institutional entity to determine what their parking need is?
Well, what is the trigger for EMU having had an overlay?
It was to give them more flexibility, so all of the overlay districts have the ability to apply to either reduce setbacks or reduce parking requirements.
Okay.
That includes landscaping.
Yeah, the overlay had everything to do with providing more flexibility, and when you go back to the original creation of the overlay, I think it was the early 2000s when it was applied to EMU, EMHS, and the hospital, and then one more, down South Main. The there a, health, not health center?
Oh, the family?
The health
Okay.
and wellness
Thank you.
center.
Well, health and wellness center.
Yeah, wellness center. And it was, this was like the whole.
I mean, there's so few to be considered that, and BMRC is an overlay as well too, so I don't know if that, how that came to be relevant.
The height of buildings is another reason.
Yeah.
And I think that's another reason why
I just think with college and universities, JMU gets to do what JMU does. I think EMU, I'm comfortable that it gets negotiated as part of the overlay.
Okay.
I don't know how the rest of the commissioners feel about it.
And I keep having this image of a public school that I know, okay, it's not around here, but, you know, it's an older, it fits the definition of sort of a neighborhood school, but I mean, it's all resident, it's in the middle of a sea of residential, and they got no parking. And everybody deals with it. It's fine, I mean, which I guess is actually another sentiment here, because we probably are we may be out of step with larger, small d democratic sense of some people in the community. That I'm not sure we've got anybody here right now who would be a big advocate for saying, well, your priority needs to be that everybody needs to have that safe space to park that car and not be bumped up against anybody. But so I know I've got that sense of it that, yeah, you know, it's always, or it's often controversial when when there's an actual proposal that somebody gets to react to. But dang, it's hard. It's hard to. In my experience, it's hard to find ones where places don't have enough parking that it's causing an actual problem. We got tons of examples going the other way, and that again, I'm thinking of even other examples where even places that you would look at and go, man, that place doesn't have enough parking. I'm thinking some commercial areas. You know what? If the commercial entities there are thriving and people want to go to them, everybody kind of manages. Yeah.
Also, I mean, in terms of places not having sufficient parking, I mean, really, only places I've ever been to that don't have sufficient parking, like literally, there isn't a parking spot. It's like a concert, that's like sold out. And even then, you walk a little bit, and it's okay. So, I agree. I've never really seen that be an issue. Perception of how difficult it is to find parking, and how quickly you're going to find parking is a different thing.
That was maybe a long-winded way of saying, I'm comfortable with the notion that public school, private school, well, not so much public school, but the private schools, we can just take it up as, whatever review you've got when the time comes, because I can certainly think of locations where, okay, everybody's going to have to drive to it, but you could also have an example of something where you'd say, this place really would manage between, the modest amount of on-site parking and overflow into the neighborhood. Yeah, people might grumble about it, but it would actually work just fine.
Waterman versus Rocktown.
Yeah, so college and university, we proposed one of these tables that it would be permitted by right in all the mixed use and commercial districts. So do we apply the same idea that as public schools, or do we need to come up with a number? And we can do more work, once you all give us a direction, we can do more work.
What was the path forward for American National University when you took over that building?
Wait, say that again?
Went to National College or whatever.
Yeah, first of all, how do you classify something like AMU, and where would they fall on this?
So they would have, so in our current ordinance, there is a requirement for college. Yeah, so in our current ordinance, we say college or university academic building, one space for every 4 classroom seats based on the maximum capacity, plus 1 space per employee.
Oh, that's a lot of parking.
I'm sorry, what subsection is that?
21.
So at the time that that building was constructed, they did a site plan, they were required to have 110 spaces based on the section that Tom just read, and they designed it with 301 spaces.
Yeah, they're incentivized to provide more parking. That was built as something else first, was it?
It's using academic college use.
Okay. Well, there's a situation where they negotiated an agreement with Divine Unity Church for Divine Unity people to park there on the weekends and show.
The original site plan was called National College of Business and Technology.
Oh, yeah,
so-
that's right. Oh, was that a by right project? So there's no mechanism for reviewing parking, okay?
They had to come back for a special use permit because part of their marketing was they had the oversized American flags. And gotta love, we had one Councilmember Weeds who, true to his radical Reformation rights, just said, I'm not voting for us supporting anybody putting up any country's flag. Sorry, I'm not doing it. So it was approved with one day vote.
It was behind the pole, I think.
Yeah, I hide the pole or size of the flag, or one or both. You may be right, but they had a marketing thing where they, by golly, they had done all this stuff, and that was part of their brand. That there was going to be this huge American flag that could be seen from stuff that needed a special use permit. They got it.
It was originally zoned industrial, they rezoned it to B2, no conditions, still not used with that right now.
Okay.
That makes sense.
I guess in general, I think that the creation of a new location for a college or university or even a private school is rare enough that if there is a mechanism whereby we can have that the conversation about parking can be lumped into some other, whether it's rezoning or special use permit, I think that would relieve you of the need to get overly technical about, because it's such a changing industry. Space needs are changing, demographics are changing. I can't imagine trying to find a parking metric that wouldn't be obsolete within 5 to 7 years.
I think that covers most of the parking minimum changes. We did receive some questions from a couple of you. I'll just go through those quickly. So the shared parking calculations, we touched on.
Yeah, you addressed that.
Yeah. One change with shared parking, so the shared parking agreements are still there. Right now, they have this weird, the agreement only needs to last for 10 years, and then I guess something, I don't know. No other community does anything like that. Shared parking agreements get reported and they're shared until they're no longer in use, and then you destroy them. I don't know why we do it the way we do, but the proposals change it to match the way they're typically handled. The stacking requirements, so stacking requirements for like a drive-through or like an ATM, they're not new entirely. They exist in the GCSM right now. What we've proposed is slightly different than the GCSM, but not horribly so.
Oh, so okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think the GCSM just gives you stacking length, so you need to have a lane of 100 feet or 200 feet or however long. drive-throughs, there's a question about, the drive-through line pouring out onto the street. From a zoning perspective, if it's a special use permit and we want to require some sort of, study of how long the drive-through needs to be, we could do that. But generally, there aren't a ton of tools on the zoning side other than requiring more space. We have, this year, we did have a drive-through that had a line that went past the intersection, a very busy intersection. It was creating all sorts of hazards, and so our police department went out and enforced traffic laws and got everyone moving along. And that requires significant manpower, and we couldn't have someone doing that at Chick-fil-A every day. That would be expensive. But for unusual events, at least, it can be handled.
I guess, part of what I was wondering with that is, in terms of stacking, there's certainly a limit in terms of how that can be useful.
Yeah.
But, at part, kind of at its core, like, zoning is kind of nuisance law. And is there actually procedurally any kind of way where there is, that one sometimes it's just so fatally egregious, where there's just cars like spilling out, long down the road on a consistent basis, like just pull up, like, in terms of what people would typically think of as a nuisance, that is it. And I don't know if there could be a mechanism to enforce that.
I'm not sure. I'm not aware of any. I know there are a few drive-throughs there are a few Chick-fil-A's in Northern Virginia where, and I don't know how the localities work this out, but during busy hours, especially during rush hour, when people are doing coffee and stuff, they have employees who are out in like traffic gear, shuffling people in the right direction so that they're not blocking major roads. I don't know if that was something that was agreed to as a special use permit or something that they negotiated with them in good faith, or threatened a nuisance suit of some sort. But yeah, there's not a ton that you can really do proactively to address it. And don't necessarily know who the tenant will be when you're first hearing about a drive-through going in somewhere.
Yeah, you've got that, and here we go again. You've got, well, I know I could fix it. What's the largest fantasy I could ever have about how many people stack up here without spilling over into the road? And we'll dedicate that space to it. Oh yeah, that's exactly what drives us nuts about our parking regulations that we have now.
Again, what I'm trying to get at is, if there is and because it's so dependent on the nature of the business, it's kind of hard to pin this down. But business is so clearly handing off all the externalities to the public, and it's just saying, well, this is your problem, and there's going to be more crashes, more people are going to get hurt, and it's going to take a lot more space, and we're not going to have any space. That rubs me the wrong way. And I'm just wondering if there's a way to address that at all. I'm not looking for, if there's no answer today, that's fine. But, partially an answer is in more places just saying, you cannot build drive through here, which is in fact a lot of work. But for those places where it is still limited control to drive through to, this is more surely restaurants than anything else, by far. So really, I am interested in what solutions might look like.
Okay.
Would there not be a way to do like a traffic impact analysis based on, I don't know how you can write it in, but like based on the franchises, total sale volume, and next time, what the traffic impact analysis would be, and link that to expected traffic.
I think it depends on where, if it's a by right use, or if they have to apply for a special exception, or yeah, what conditions were placed on the special exception when they got it, to go back and relook at things.
I guess the short answer is there any kind of enforcement vehicle through which something that I'm describing, that I'm describing might be addressed? It's theoretical. There's the general public nuisance.
Yeah, I'll have to look more closely at some of the general public nuisance. Every now and then a locality finds some interesting way of having a judge declare something a public nuisance, so you never know. I'll see if I can find anything. There are a few, maybe just pull up the specific sites that CNC has. Oh, yeah, we could go through the example.
I'm sorry.
I was, the Casey's questions about the citations to different sections. The sections that he's citing.
Section number, sorry. Yep.
Sorry.
And you already answered a lot of my questions, so.
Yeah. Yeah, so 4 and 5. So the conflicting requirements, that is really about the dwellings generally needing 1 parking space per dwelling, except for the 2 districts where the district-specific rule applies. And then also for downtown, because the downtown district doesn't have a minimum vehicle parking space, so that controls. Do we have an example of the multiple uses?
Yeah, some existing examples of those that we could think of are, like if there was a property that had a building with retail and apartments, both are principal uses, so we would calculate, those 2 uses using the we talked about earlier this month about a property that we proposed, they're planning for self-storage and an indoor recreation facility. So that's an example, another example of 2 principal uses that go through that calculation. Is that what you were looking for, examples of? I'm not sure I hit your...
To be honest with you, I don't really remember.
Okay, no problem. Yeah.
This is,
Section 10.366.
yeah. I think you've already answered my question.
Okay.
I may not have been referring to that section, but I think you've already answered my question.
Well, one of your questions was more general, so what is the goal of the minimum parking requirement? And I'm kind of curious what the commission thinks. And no one particularly likes having to drive around the parking lot looking for a spot, but I don't know that it's just general convenience. I want there to be an oversupply so that I don't have to think when I get to a parking lot. I guess as staff work through this and we try and take modest bites out of reducing some of these parking requirements, I would be interested in what people think. I want to make sure we don't unintentionally go too far if there are things that the commission or the public think are important to protect, and I know some of it has to do with, we'd rather people have their own parking on their personal private property so that they're not fighting over on-street parking spaces and we don't have to deal with that dispute. And kind of becomes part of it.
The one that comes to my mind that really was more germane to some of the earlier discussion is and I really struggle with this because it is both not a sentiment that I have and a sentiment that I'm surprised often at how widely it is, which is particularly in area, basically in the spillover situation where there's not enough provided, and especially if it spills over into a residential area, I no longer can park right in front of my house. Okay, and where do you park? Oh, I have to park in front of the house next door. Okay, I'm having a hard. Sorry, I have a hard time seeing where the problem is there, and that actually does not make me popular talking to people a lot of times. So I mean that's the one thing, because I don't know that I can really. I have to struggle to think of examples other than that I see here. But that's the one that sort of jumps out at me that. When you've got folks that, if they perceive that their on-street parking near their residence that does not belong to them, is not going to be treated like it's belonged to them when they're used to it, that's a conspicuous area I expect to hear from people.
I think the other thing that I sometimes hear from folks is downtown, which of course doesn't have any no parking requirements. So in general, I hear two things. It's nice downtown, and I need to, and they describe this nice part of it, but it's hard to get parking. But in practice, what I think they mean is I can't park directly in front of the business that I'm intending to build. And I think
I happened to hit one of those peak times at the Water Street deck, and I couldn't find a spot there, and I don't know that I can drive up top. I always forget about that, and I had to drive around the corner to park. Yeah.
And I think there's a reason why downtown is nice, and also I can't immediately find parking directly in front of it. Those things are very much related to my opinion.
Well, then some of the other questions do with do they take into account availability of nearby public parking, street parking? And currently they don't. There are communities that do. That's certainly something we can look into. Other forms of transportation don't currently have any provisions related to if there's a bus stop or something nearby, reducing minimum parking. Yeah, and then why one for 300 for some uses, one for 50. I don't know what the original source of that was. I'm sure there was a very well done study that someone referenced at some point, maybe. Although I guess kind of alluded to the parking becomes kind of an induced demand problem sometimes, where people start driving and parking because there's a parking lot that's readily available. So with compact vehicle spaces, currently 25% can be compact, so we just kept that. I looked up when we first introduced this, and around that time, somewhere around 10 to 15% of cars were compact vehicles, and so it was a little bit higher. And it seems like this is a common thing. I don't know if it's a trend or what. My sense is that cars have gotten bigger since, and on the one hand, certainly good to encourage people to drive smaller vehicles if they don't need a large one. On the other hand, worry about the safety implications. So it's something we can look into further if there's interest in making adjustments. But this largely just reflects what
what we do today.
The same with the parking space adjacent to a wall, and that is mostly related to, not really overhang, but, I guess when people park in a parking space that's immediately adjacent to a wall, they are more nervous about getting too close and tend to hang out further than they otherwise would. It's the rationale I found.
Is there concern about
This is the parking where it's in front.
Yeah,
I mean, you've seen, what was it? I mean, I've seen like cars like crash into the wall of the parking deck and stuff.
I think there's also like some people like to pull all the way, like you have stopwalk or something like that. Some people will like overhang the end of the parking space, and you can't do that under the wall there. So it gives them a little extra room to park, I guess, a particularly long vehicle.
With the driveway standards, the next section, that's the residential driveway. So currently we have a minimum, but we don't have a maximum. So this is introducing a maximum 12 feet if it's a lot that's 40 feet wide or less, and then limits it to either 30% of the total lot width or 24 feet, so you can have a 2-car driveway. And this really just applies at the lot line, so you can have it 12 feet and then pulled out if you want. Make additional use of that space in your front yard. But this is largely about kind of that the intersection with the public street and the concerns about the slope and the grade and everything, and the curb cuts, and trying to minimize the number of conflict points for pedestrians that walk, and minimize the size of those conflict points. G2, so this section is about maneuvering. Basically, if you have a single-family detached home or single-family attached or duplex, you can back out of a driveway. Otherwise, you need to be able to maneuver.
this is 1037.
68, yeah, G2.
68, okay, sorry, thank you.
Yeah. And this mirrors what we do today. Although today I think we have a provision for townhouses. If they have a garage, they are allowed to back out into a public street. But if they don't have a garage, they can't.
And I think it's more specific than it's like a how it's worded,
It applies to
the
quadruplexes
2-car
and
garage.
townhouses. They have to have a 2-car
Yeah.
garage.
I imagine that was adopted to facilitate some very specific development at some point.
And it only applies if you're dealing with all right.
10-70, that's about the correction line. 10-72 says C1. What does the 15% look like? Is it smaller with a larger parking lot? It's depending on the actual size of the parking lot. If it's fairly small, you're not going to have mandated interior landscaping, so you could capture all of your landscaping on the perimeter, and if you wanted to. For a larger parking lot, we do have the landscaping islands and landscaping mediums. If your parking lot is big enough, and that starts to capture interior landscaping as well.
Is that why, like, the Harrisonburg crossing in the middle, there's like the one little landscaped?
I don't think Harrisonburg Crossing is really.
Harrisonburg Crossing was well before the.
Yeah, the landscaping that they have is generally Crawford landscaping that's kind of centered towards 81 for like a tree buffer more or less, but they weren't required at that time to do anything with the interior unless it's voluntary. So.
In fact, it's probably something that encourages to have some rules about that.
The 15%, like your return on the 15%, at least visually, is going to depend on the scale of the development. I mean, there's a variety of things that have been gone through site plan review that have different amounts of 15% that just haven't been built yet. We did look at one or two, like I said, Aldi is a site that was developed within the landscaping plan where they provided, actually I have it right here, they actually provided well over past the 15% for their site. And they had enough parking, like they met the parking requirement plus some and did some extra landscaping. The Family Dollar up near the Navigation Center, or Dollar Tree, whatever version that is. They're a site that also was required to have landscaping, and they're kind of like right at their required parking plus the minimum 15%. So you want to look at some sites that have actually developed with those standards. A lot of our big shopping centers predate the landscaping requirements.
So parking garages. So the building footprint of the parking garage is,
And that was in the definition, so.
yeah, so it's a multi-story parking garage, yeah, it's just the, basically the bottom floor. Your question did prompt me to think about how does it work if someone wants to build like a Texas donut type thing, where like you drive in, where the parking is literally in the center and it goes up and all around, like you've got usable space all around it. You can't you might not be able to get within 30 feet of your parking garage because the parking garage is interior to a building.
It looked like one side of that's a building.
Yeah.
I was also wondering about that because, well, building, sorry.
Yeah, and you would have a limited, yeah, if one side is abutting the building or it's attached to the building, you have a limited amount of space where you could put landscaping. So I might have to think through.
I was just thinking about that because, I think the Lindsay might be the only design where that's actually for development, like the third one, where it actually abuts the building.
Yeah.
And I think there are some advantages in not requiring. I guess my thinking of this question was basically, do we want to require landscaping on a side that connects with a building where it pretty clearly does not need landscaping when it's just wall on wall? But of course you don't want to discourage landscaping requirements on other sides.
The last one, previously we did talk about in downtown limiting the location of parking. If you wanted surface parking, it needing to be, you couldn't put surface parking between the building and the public street, usually. I guess the question is, what if we did that elsewhere? I mean, we could. I think with neighborhood commercial, we're proposing to limit the amount of parking that they can have between the building and the public street. The more auto-centered parts of town, we don't have anything written into the regulations now, but it's certainly something we can explore.
And I was thinking, even downtown, there's some places like this. I mean, I love the co-op, so I don't want to say anything remotely negative about the co-op building. I mean, I walk there every other day, basically. I can't go there without crossing a relatively large parking lot.
Yeah.
And that's true for a lot of places downtown. And even places which aren't like really auto-centric, or don't have to be auto-centric in other parts of town. And I walk west on 33 a little bit sometimes, and every single business is a massive parking lot.
Yeah.
Any way to the side.
Mhm.
There's some way for someone walking to get into a building without risking getting hit by a car.
Mhm. Right.
That'd be right.
That's one of the premises of traditional neighborhood design.
Any other questions you all have?
I think of everything we have.
All right, well, then anything else to staff before we move on to
Yeah,
next
so-
steps?
Yeah, so we'll have our next regular meeting on, on September 9th, it'll be a regular, public hearing type item. And then our next work session is scheduled for September 15th. Know that while we're preparing, still continuing to work on the draft ordinance and preparing for the 15th work session, we're also meeting with city departments to go over the same content that, and get their feedback as well. And then we don't have dates yet to share, but we're looking at late September, early October for public engagement, public open house is what at this point in time that we're aiming for, but we'll see how we get through the next couple of weeks and firm that up.
Wait, when is it coming?
We're thinking sometime like late September, early October, but we haven't pinned down the date yet. And there will be at least two, public open houses or opportunities for people to meet with us in person.
Well, so you're saying by Labor Day, you have any more thoughts on the naming?
Yeah, the names, that you might have, or get more or less just that.
Okay.
All right, was there anything else? All right, with that, before we sign off, Commissioner Cindy, thanks very much for your participation. If I'm right, it's pushing 3 a.m. where you are. So your dedication is much appreciated. And
thank you, Chairman Bill. Thanks, Bill. Thanks for arranging the meeting, and apologies for being late a couple of minutes. We just had some connection issues, but thank you again. I really appreciate the